Some people prepare for moments that never happen, not because they failed, but because the other person never arrived. It's strange how being ready doesn't always mean being met. Being ready is often mistaken for urgency, impatience, or wanting something too soon. But for many people, readiness looks nothing like that at all because it is quiet, measured, almost invisible. And instead of rushing forward, it gently arranges life around a possibility that has not yet arrived but still feels reasonable enough to wait for, not as a demand, but as a posture, a way of standing in the world with space already prepared. For these people, being ready does not mean chasing a moment, it means making room for it, adjusting expectations, softening timelines, and trusting that timing will eventually recognize the invitation, even if there are no guarantees, even if nothing visibly changes for a long time. From the outside, this readiness often appears calm, stable, even admirable, because nothing about it looks frantic or desperate. But internally, it is sustained by countless small, repeated decisions that rarely get acknowledged. Decisions like choosing not to move on yet, choosing not to close a door, choosing to remain emotionally available when it would be far easier to protect oneself and stop expecting alignment. Over time, readiness slowly stops feeling like anticipation and begins to feel like maintenance, the quiet work of maintaining space, maintaining openness, maintaining a future that has not yet arrived and may never arrive in the form that was imagined. And this kind of preparation does not announce itself, does not look productive, yet reshapes the person deeply. What makes this experience particularly difficult is that the moment often does exist. It is not imaginary and it is not naive. It simply is not shared because one person arrives prepared, attentive, open, while the other does not or cannot, or arrives later after readiness has already carried too much weight and begun to change shape. Timing, it turns out, is rarely collective. It does not move according to agreement or fairness. It moves unevenly and individually. And when it fails to align, the moment passes, not because it wasn't real, but because it didn't arrive on both sides at the same time. Being ready too early creates a specific kind of solitude, not the solitude of being alone, but the solitude of being present without being met, where nothing feels wrong enough to leave and nothing feels right enough to arrive, so the waiting continues, not frozen but suspended, quietly reshaping the person who waits. This kind of waiting alters how someone sees themselves because patience stretches, expectations soften, and identity slowly adapts to a space where readiness remains active but unfulfilled, where presence exists without reciprocity. Eventually, a quiet guilt begins to form, not loud enough to demand answers but persistent enough to linger. A question that sounds something like this. Maybe readiness itself was the mistake. Maybe staying open only prolonged the waiting. Maybe being prepared made the absence feel heavier instead of lighter. This guilt is rarely spoken out loud because it sounds unreasonable, almost ungrateful, as if readiness were something to apologize for, but it exists nonetheless, subtly influencing how long someone is willing to remain available before they begin to question whether openness is still worth the cost. At some point, readiness changes, not dramatically and not all at once, but gradually, almost quietly, as it turns inward and becomes less about preparing for arrival and more about accepting that timing cannot be negotiated alone, that no amount of preparation can force alignment to happen. The person does not stop being ready, but they stop waiting in the same way, and readiness becomes less hopeful, perhaps, but more grounded, less oriented around a specific moment, and more oriented around self respect and internal balance. Even when the moment never comes, readiness is not wasted because it reshapes a person quietly, teaching patience without resentment, attention without obsession, and the ability to hold space without demanding immediate return. Qualities that remain even when the original moment does not. These qualities integrate into who the person becomes, not as loss, but as depth, as a quieter form of maturity that does not need resolution to justify its existence. Sometimes the moment never arrives, sometimes it comes too late. And sometimes readiness becomes a private chapter that no one else ever reads, but it mattered, because for a time someone stood fully present, prepared, open, and willing to meet something real, even if the meeting never happened. And that, quietly, is its own kind of completion.